screen.
Giving everybody a few more minutes to jump on here. Love it. Can you believe that it is the end of March? What happened?
It's crazy.
All right. I know that people are still joining, and that's totally fine. But thank you for joining us on time. We're going to go ahead and get started. I recognize it is straight up 1 o'clock, and there is no shame in that. So thank you for joining us on this crazy, rainy Wednesday afternoon. I think you're going to enjoy some of the topics that we have prepared for you, and we'll try to keep the pace going as fast as we can because there's a lot of good stuff, especially toward the end. And a lot of this we've kind of built based on some feedback, some war stories, some current events that we have heard, our own observations, et cetera. So hopefully there's a lot to garner here together. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and share with you the agenda. So welcome officially, and thanks for your time today. What we hope to accomplish is just to talk about some current things that are happening in the market. And you'll see a couple of things here: NAR, GAR, and GREC updates. A lot of movement in those areas. Our value and our role as agents, it does not change with the market. It's just that we want to highlight certain aspects as the markets change. NAR, clear cooperation, what is that? What does that have to do with us? FMLS new registered status, some of you may have heard of that. We want to add a little clarity. Coming soon listings, we'll be talking about those best practices, working with buyers and sellers. And then of course, Training Tuesday follow-up. Our whole goal today is just to give you some practical takeaways to best represent our clients and put them at the forefront of our decision making and help you shine as the amazing practitioners that you are. That's our goal. And I know that at the end of our time, that's what we're going to accomplish.
Yeah, well said, Jenny. And so, we're going to just kind of start off by acknowledging what you guys are living, breathing, feeling on a daily and weekly basis is this very kind of unique market. It's kind of like, though, isn't every season of the real estate market somewhat unique? I can remember 12, 13 years ago when we were coming up out of the recession and dealing with short sales and dealing with banks and getting training on the short sale process. Well, this is just another ebb and flow in the market. And, just this still dealing with historic inventory levels at lows. Right now it's not a question of you get a multiple offer. It's just a question of how many multiple offers you're either competing against or juggling if you're representing the seller and all the nuances and craziness associated with that. And, two, how can we help our buyers secure their dream home, especially in such a competitive environment right now and everybody getting creative in terms of what they do with their offers? And then, finding the sellers. We are in the midst of the traditional historic spring selling season. And, we all know what happened a year ago and we were sheltering up. We were hoping to be in a situation where we're all coming up out from underneath that right now with the access to the vaccine and so forth and so on. But still finding sellers is a challenge because a lot of them are like, where am I going to go if I sell the house? So we got all these kind of things coming at us. And I think, before we really jump into the meat of this, Jenny and I would both like to just say thank you for everything that you guys have been doing. Despite all of the craziness going on right now, we continue to set records as a company. You continue to outperform the market and what's going on in the market. And it's just, I got to give them a little golf clap there, Jenny, because it's just fantastic, everything that they've been able to do. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm going to say a woohoo too. No golf clap for me. A woohoo, a hearty woohoo.
So again, Jenny kind of touched on this at the beginning while we were going through the agenda, but we'll really want you to guys, walk away with today, and what we hope we kind of touch on and accomplish. And there'll be lots of opportunity to kind of dive deeper into a lot of the things that we're going to cover today. There'll be a training Tuesday in a couple of weeks after spring break, but all throughout the month of April. Tori, our new director of career services, is hard at work coming up with some great content that we'll be sharing to kind of, again, empower all of you to kind of really be at the forefront in the market as we move through the spring and into the summer. But today we just want to help identify what we believe best practices to how you can continue delivering the exceptional service and professionalism that you consistently do while still protecting the best interest of our clients and customers during these unprecedented times. So again, all of this today is going to just be a focus on, again, delivering that best practice and delivering that professionalism and service to protect our clients. So, and I thought we would just kind of start off the meeting with kind of going back to, Real Estate 101 and the Code of Ethics and our guiding principle that we all commit to kind of adhering to and following as realtors. And we're going to get into a little bit, how many of us are out in the marketplace here in Georgia versus licensees in a little bit. But I thought, it's interesting that our Code of Ethics starts off with the very first thing it addresses is what are our duties to our clients and customers? Article 1, and I'm just going to read it for the sake of reading it. When representing a buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, or other client as an agent, we as realtors pledge ourselves to protect and promote the interests of the client. This obligation to the client is primary, but it does not relieve realtors of their obligation to treat all parties honestly. And then it goes on to say, when serving a buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, or other party in a non-agency capacity or working with them as a customer, realtors remain obligated to treat all parties honestly as well. So again, I think it's a good baseline for us to kind of have in terms of a frame of mind as we start moving through some of these things today, again, tying it back to just best practices.
Love it. The recent article in the Wall Street Journal, and Todd, you pointed this out to me, and there's so many interesting things, but there's currently more realtors in the US than actual listings. So let that just sink in for a second, right? So there's 1.4 million realtors and only 1.08 million listings in the entire United States. Currently in Georgia, a little bit closer to home, there's 104 real estate licensees. They're not all realtors. Those are all licensees. And then of those, about 46,000 are realtors. And I would love for you to talk about what this means, Todd.
Yeah, so I mean, if you kind of put that in perspective, well over half of the people out in the marketplace don't subscribe to a code of ethics, right? They don't, agree to hold themselves to a higher level of professionalism by virtue of not being a realtor. In addition to that, you kind of wonder, how committed are they to actually this as an industry, as a career? And, I know a lot of us out there right now, I don't know exactly what the number would be for the 6 core county metro area of Atlanta, but I got to think that a good percentage of that almost 60,000 differential of non-realtor members probably are running amok here in our marketplace, and I hate to kind of say that in a negative context, but, when the market has this perception of being good and easy, lots of people jump into the fray. And, I think that's what we're seeing. And so we bring this up simply to kind of, again, plant the seed of there's a lot of inexperienced people out in the marketplace, coupled with a lot of people who got their licenses that don't see the need or the value of being a realtor, and again, kind of adhering and upholding themselves to a higher standard. So these are just numbers that we learned last week at GAR that we wanted to share. So again, just trying to kind of set the stage and keep things in perspective as, we all are navigating the kind of environment and climate of the real estate landscape right now. So this was interesting too. Last week, when we were at GAR, Seth Wiseman gave a presentation And many of you may know or you may not know, but part of the benefit of being a member of the Georgia Association of Realtors is there is a legal hotline. Now, oftentimes we don't have to use it because we've got the awesome Ashu Sharma at our disposal, and and we can reach out to her and get great advice from Ashu. But for those who don't have that as a resource, oftentimes agents are calling the GAR hotline, and they can go in and leave a question and somebody calls them back and answers the question. And I wish that we were in a live audience forum so I could have people raise their hand and offer up an answer. And for those that attended GAR, you can't answer this question because you already know the answer. But what would you think is the #1 question right now that the GAR hotline is receiving? If somebody even wants to throw it in the chat, we'll give a quick second here or there. I'm just kind of curious to see if anybody has a stab or a guess at it. Let's see.
And while people are entering something in the chat, speaking of questions, terrible segue, but I'm going to use it anyway. We are going to be taking questions at the end of this. So if there's something that pops up in your brain as we're moving along, feel free to enter it in the chat. We're going to try and cover as much as we can. And then at the end, if we haven't hit on something, we'll do our best to make sure that we cover it.
Yeah. All right. So I'm looking at the chat, and a couple of them are almost right on. And then the others that have put in the answers, it's the #2 question right now, or the #2 thing that's being asked. But the #1 question right now is, how do I count binding agreement days? And it's like, we shared this with the broker team on Monday, and their jaws, I literally saw a couple jaws drop and hit the floor. They're like, are you serious? I mean, this is real estate 101, and this is the #1 question coming to our state hotline. So again, I share that just from the standpoint of giving you some perspective. You guys probably feel it, you see it, you deal with it every day, but we got a lot of inexperienced folks out in the marketplace right now working on top of the complexity of the market in general. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Again, when Seth shared that last week, everybody was like, oh my God, you're kidding me. But then the next question, most popular question, does involve multiple offers. I saw a couple people in the chat there say, do you have to present them all, so forth and so on. And so that's the other question that's coming in. And then the other thing that we had a chance to chat about, or I had a conversation with Paul Brower, who is with the Real Estate Commission, and he was sharing kind of some of the complaints that they're seeing right now, what's coming into their hotline, so to speak. And one of the #1 complaints was from members of the public about not being treated fairly in this market. And so I'm sure that probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to many of you. But the reason, again, we wanted to bring it up is just as a little reminder that when the Real Estate Commission gets a complaint, they have an obligation to investigate every single complaint, whether there is any merit to the complaint or not. They have a duty to investigate. So know that when that investigation gets opened up and you and your broker get a notification from somebody there at the Real Estate Commission that there's been a complaint filed against you, and you have to produce whatever information they're going to ask for, once that file gets opened on that specific kind of interaction or transaction, they can look for anything. So it is not just limited to what the complaint was about. So as you're turning over all of the stuff that they're asking you to turn over, they can look at anything and everything associated with this particular individual who you had the interaction with. So just a friendly reminder that, as you're doing, and all of you do a fantastic job of writing great contracts and making sure that all of the addendums and exhibits are attached and completed and correct. So I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but it is, I think, kind of incumbent on us to just remind that, look, they can look at anything. So make sure that we've got all of our disclosures in there. Make sure we have all of our agencies agreements in there completed. Make sure you've got your buyer or your customer, brochures, and your seller, what a seller should know before selling their home, brochures in that file. Just make sure everything's nice, neat, tidy, in-app files, easy for you to send and send out. So that's really the reason to kind of go over that as well. So Jenny, I'll let you take this next one.
Sure. So why are we telling you all of this? Well, it's a crazy market. Can we just do this and give each other a hug, right? That's what it feels like. There's a unique set of challenges. every market has its unique set. This is particularly interesting because of the extremity of it. But the market, as we talked about, is saturated with agents. Over half are not realtors. And how that's impacting the market is very different. They may have connections, but they may not have spent the time to build co-op relationships. They may not, have cultivated experience in negotiating or knowing how to handle multiple offers. And these are the people that you may have to co-op with because your buyer needs a place to live or your seller is wanting to sell. So that's really why we wanted to share all of this, because it's the reality of how business has to be done today. And over, we talk about the differentiation of our company and you as incredible practitioners and realtors. They choose us, they choose you because you know what you're doing, because you've spent the time to cultivate those co-op relationships. You've been to people's caravans, you return phone calls, you give feedback. All of those things give us an advantage, particularly in a market like this, where there's 50 different multiple offers coming in. And when your name is on it and our company, Harry Norman, is on it, they know that they're going to get the deal done and they know that they're going to be treated fairly and rightly in the process. And those are great talking points to share with the clients. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. Specifically, most ethical, professional, and knowledgeable. And this is not meant to pump you up, although I kind of hope it does. This is meant to help remind ourselves of what we should be sharing with our clients, because it is special and unique, and it is very different than the experience across the whole marketplace as a whole. And most importantly, and Todd alluded to this before when he started us out by reading the Article 1 of the Code of Ethics, they know their best interests as our clients come first beyond anything else.
Well said, Jenny. Well said. So the next thing we're going to do is just kind of touch on, some things to be thinking about in this market when you're working with both sellers and buyers. And I think that, we have seen a shift in overly the last year and a half, honestly, in, communicating what value we bring in today's marketplace, right? And I think it's been a shift a little bit away from, if you think back to, when you went through our Smart Start or Career Builder, or, in the past as an experienced agent, and you kind of were in the listing presentation portion of that training class, talked a lot about, the marketing that we would do for the property to showcase it, highlight it, expose it to the greatest number of buyers possible. Talked a lot about how to effectively price the property, look at comps, things of that nature. That was kind of the value that we brought to the relationship in a lot of cases, how to prep the home for sale and so forth and so on. I think we're seeing a shift away from that though right now with everything that's going on, because let's face it, there's not much marketing that we do right now. In most cases, other than put it in the MLS and put a sign on the ground, and we've got a parking jam out in the street in front of the house. So, we got to talk a little bit more about how we're going to help them navigate this process in this current marketplace and be more of that trusted advisor. And I think a good way to kind of set the stage for that is at the very beginning of the relationship. When you're there for the first time on the listing appointment, is setting clear expectations in advance of what the process is going to look like. Not while you're in the heat of the moment and the multiple offers are flooding in. That's really not the time to be having the conversation about, yeah, we're probably going to get multiple offers. Yeah, there's probably going to be all sorts of crazy terms in there. There's going to be things that you probably haven't seen before. If you sold your home before in a market not like this, these are the things that we're going to have to navigate. Yeah, you're probably going to be displaced and out of your home. We're going to have a line of people out your front door. Walking them through that, setting those expectations up front, because as we've said before in the past, the reason people get upset or frustrated is when expectations aren't met. So if we can manage and control those expectations as effectively and efficiently as we can in the front of the process, that's where we really have the opportunity to demonstrate the value that we're bringing to the transaction, to the relationship. And then I think too, expanding on, in addition to those things that you touched on earlier, Jenny, the expertise, the knowledge, the professionalism, the overall role you play throughout the entire process, managing the process, helping them gather together 10, 15, 20 different offers. And as they're coming in, helping them kind of sit down and looking for, it's not always about price, right? I mean, a lot of times it is about price, but other times it's about other terms in the contract, and helping them kind of see through all of that, kind of soup, so to speak, and kind of draw out the things that are important to them and unique to their situation. And I think beyond anything too, it's just being the voice of calm and reason, because as all of you know, and you've dealt with it, can be a very emotional process, especially if you've got people on the other side of the transaction, especially in a co-op agent that's kind of like all crazy helter skelter and everything's an emergency. Your ability to be the voice of calm and reason and kind of help just kind of tamper down those emotions to a certain respect is huge, huge, huge in this market right now. So again, I think it's been a shift away from what we traditionally would talk about in terms of the value we bring to the transaction historically in the past, and kind of some of these things. And I'm sure many of you are having these conversations in advance versus in the heat of the moment, but just again, as a friendly reminder. And then what about with buyers, Jenny?
Yeah, it's the same concept, setting those clear expectations in advance. Having sort of, we always talk about with listings when people have an expectation of my house is worth X, and then we tell them, well, here's what the market is saying that your house is worth. The same concept, only in reverse with buyers. What's happening in the market? Are you, have you heard of multiple offers? Are you comfortable understanding how that might impact you? What about if you had to pay over the list price? Are you comfortable with that? Talking about in the specific areas what where their head is. Have they talked to their lender about some of those things, because they might need to have extra cash on hand or know how much bandwidth that they have. You might not get the first house. You might not get the first 5 houses. You want to temper that a little bit because we don't want to scare them off, but we also want to be very realistic about here's what it looks like to go about finding and securing a house in the current market. And again, the role that we play is managing the process. People start to panic. None of this is a surprise to you all because you're experiencing it, but it's just helpful to set those expectations before you ever start looking. And, the expectation of you're going to have to drop everything and go see this house, or, whatever the case may be. Specifically, navigating the pros and cons of the terms and how you would structure an offer. Things like escalation clauses, highest and best. Are we going to include due diligence or take out some contingencies? And again, you don't have to go through all 100 variations of that in your first conversation, but you want to start warming them up to this is where your head has to be for us to be successful and move forward in the process. And then the question of overpaying, because if you haven't already, you definitely will get asked that question. How do I know if I'm overpaying? When will I know? And that's definitely something that we're going to spend some time on in a few minutes as well. Or I could do it here. Let me just tackle it here, if I may. It's something I'm so passionate about, and everywhere I go, I'm being asked the same question, and I bet you are too. And that is, are people going to look back a month or 2 or 3 from now and say, gosh, I overpaid 100,000 or 50,000 or 20,000, whatever the case may be. And nobody knows that until it's hindsight. But here are some things that I think are salient to think about or include in your dialogue with potential buyers. One is the dynamics of the Atlanta market. So I'd like to think of people that are exiting New York City. If they bought 6 months ago and they pay a heavy premium for being in the city, and now perhaps the property is worth less because, a lot of people are leaving the city for the suburbs in that area. Do you think that would have thought they were overpaying at the time? Probably not. But the mechanics in our market are on the rise, meaning that there are a lot of people coming to the Atlanta market. Locally, people want to stay here. Lots of companies relocating to the Atlanta market. We've talked about that on numerous other occasions. Besides that, we've had steady price appreciation. It's not anything that's too over the top or off a cliff. And then the fact that rates are still low is driving demand. So all of those things yield steady, consistent growth and demand, which in my book means, yes, I might be paying more than I ever thought I would pay at the present time than even in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm overpaying. But the only way that I'm ever going to know is when I am ready to sell and if I'm, going to be upside down or whatever the case may be. So if your clients ask you, the answer that I would give to that is the market dynamics look very positive and strong for us in the Atlanta market. But a lot of it depends on your plans and how quickly you think that you're going to resell. Because if it is something that's super quick, you're only going to stay for a year, maybe the market dynamics don't change that much. But hopefully those are some good talking points that you can give to give some reassurance to people that they're not doing something crazy. And do we have a crystal ball that guarantees that? No. But a lot of those mechanics give us those great reassurances.
Those are great points, Jenny. And I saw where I maybe as echoing, is my audio a little bit better now?
Keep talking and we'll find
it. All right. So, okay, moving on. So basically, what we wanted to talk about next is clear cooperation, because it kind of is the place where a lot of these recent changes, we're going to talk about the new registered status here in a little bit, but this is the place where a lot of what we're dealing with today kind of started from. And many of you are probably very familiar with clear cooperation, but it's something that NAR passed 2 summers ago, and then they gave a grace period to the MLSs to kind of get their houses in order and come up with whatever new policies or whatever they were going to put out to their members in terms of what they needed to do with regards to staying in alignment with what this policy says. And because the MLSs, due to the sharing of information and so forth and so on, they have to follow what the rules are that NAR laid out regarding clear cooperation, which is why you have the MLSs doing this. So in a nutshell, what clear cooperation says is, though, anytime a property is publicly marketed that has an exclusive listing associated with it, it must be put into the MLS within 1 business day. Now, they do give the MLSs the opportunity to kind of say, but if your rules say something different, that's fine. But 1 business day is typically the norm. We all know that for FMLS, that's still currently 48 hours. So there is that, little area where there's that opportunity to, follow FMLS's rules. But then, so the question becomes then, what is defined as public marketing? And so this is pulled straight from the clear cooperation policy. And what NAR defines as public marketing is, it includes, but is not limited to, flyers displayed in windows, yard signs, digital marketing on public-facing websites, brokerage website displays, including IDX and VOWs, digital communications marketing, things like email blasts, multi-brokerage listing sharing networks, and applications available to the general public. So that's NAR's definition of public marketing. But what we're going to do is even take a little bit of a deeper dive into clear cooperation and some of the questions that often get asked. And you'll see that they refer to policy statement 8, which is basically the clear cooperation rule. So one of the questions is, and again, this is pulled straight from NAR's website, is, does policy statement 8 prohibit office exclusives? The answer is no. Office exclusive listings are an important option for sellers concerned about privacy and wide exposure of their property being for sale. In an office exclusive listing, direct promotion of the listing between the brokers and licensees affiliated with the listing brokerage, and one-to-one promotion between these licensees and their clients is not considered public advertising. So in a nutshell for us, what does that mean? Examples of that would be us using InstaList, or the closed Facebook group that we have for upcoming buyer and seller needs, or when you guys are in your sales meetings and you talk about, hey, I've got an upcoming listing in such and such neighborhood, that would fall under the one-on-one promotion. So that does not violate or is not against the clear cooperation rule or policy statement 8.0. However, the next question says, does policy statement 8.0 require listings to be submitted to the MLS if they are advertised to a select group of brokers outside the listing broker's office? The answer is yes. Private listing networks that include more brokers or licensees than those affiliated with the listing brokerage constitute public advertising or display pursuant to policy statement 8. Listings shared in multi-brokerage networks by participants must be submitted to the MLS for cooperation. In this case, if they're members of FMLS, within the 48-hour rule. So we put there in little parentheses, this would include any Facebook groups or other networking groups where there was more than one brokerage was a participant, or more than one agent. So if you've got an agent from XYZ company and an agent from ABC company, and they're in a closed Facebook group together, even if it's closed and not open to the public, or they're in some other kind of networking group, the minute that that exchange takes place, according to clear cooperation and policy statement 8, that listing should be submitted to the MLS so it can be put in the MLS, whether it be as a coming soon or an active property or whatever the case may be. So again, coming straight from NAR. Jenny, you want to take the next couple here?
I do. Go back if you don't mind real quick.
Sure.
And the reason that we bring this up is, first of all, are you ever going to cite the statement 8.0? No, because outside of this, you're never going to hear what that means. And frankly, I couldn't even quote that outside of this. But the point of this is that you all have seen in the marketplace at large where there are comments on social media about, hey, thanks agent so-and-so for getting me in this property before it hit the market or early or whatever the case may be. And I hearken back to what the feedback was that we saw a couple slides ago about the number one GREC complaint is I didn't feel like I was treated fairly. And because of the intensity of the market right now, that's going to become more and more of a legitimate concern. And it's incumbent upon us to put our clients' needs first and to be doing things in the best manner possible to achieve their goals, yet still working in a fair marketplace. So that's the reason that we're bringing this up, just to keep it at the forefront, because there's a lot of factors and mishmash that sometimes can cloud judgment. And we want you to be clear on the best things that set you up for success. So
Well said.
we can go on to the other stuff. I hope there's no more numbers and there's not a quiz, right? Because I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
No quiz.
Okay, good. So does policy statement 8.0 apply to non-active listings? Yes, it does. It applies to any listing that is or will be available for cooperation. And a good example of this is coming soon listings displayed or advertised to the public must be submitted to MLS for cooperation with other participants. MLSs can enact coming soon rules, which we know that many have, providing for delays and restrictions on certain status periods, ensuring flexibility in marketing times and marketing abilities, while still meeting the participants' obligation for cooperation. We touched a little bit on that about, how that might work. Each MLS is a little bit different, and we all have experienced that. And we're going to talk about something that's specific to FMLS in a moment. The next one is, what if the listing isn't ready to be shown? Are coming soon or delayed showing listings allowed under policy statement 8.0? And the concept of coming soon or delayed showings can be achieved. Listings that are not truly ready. So there's not like a loophole. These are just, legitimate repairs, renovations, whatever might need to be done. And there's allowable exceptions for that. MLSs can add clarity to those policies by giving specific statuses and showing requirements. And the most common implementations do not allow for showings of the listing until the status is changed to active, and any showings of listings would immediately trigger that status change. So you'll see something that we hinted at before, which is FMLS recently launched their registered status. And we're not going to go into a ton of details on that. There's great FAQs on FMLS's website. We also have a Training Tuesday topic to share with you specifics, not all the FAQs, but some of the more often asked questions. But we'll highlight a couple of points here. When you sign a listing agreement, but the marketing date, you guys remember at the beginning of this year when the new listing, the exclusive listing agreements came into take place, there's now something called a marketing date. So there's the date that you sign it, then there's the marketing date, which basically is, hey, when we're ready to launch this to the public. In this case, registered is for the time period before it's ready to go public, but after the listing agreement is signed. And so it can only be seen by the listing or co-listing agent, the broker, and the office staff. And the premise is it's there. We want to make sure that your commission is protected and that you're protected, but it's not ready to go live or even coming soon. And it cannot be shown while it's in registered status. And then, as I mentioned before, a lot more FAQs can be covered, and you'll be hearing that in upcoming Training Tuesdays. But we wanted to touch on it, expose you to it, so that if you hear about it, or if you have a seller that wants to take advantage of it, you've got that in your arsenal.
Yeah, and just to add a few comments to this too, this basically FMLS came up with this status primarily for two reasons. One was to kind of be more in sync and alignment with the changes that the Forms Committee made to the exclusive listing agreement, but then also tying back to that last policy statement, that we shared with regards to, can you still do these things if the property's not ready to be shown? So it kind of checks both of those boxes, which is why I think FMLS, part of the reason why they decided to create this new status. So we're going to quickly then jump into just some coming soon guidance. And again, not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because your brokers will be going over this more in depth at a future upcoming Training Tuesday. But just wanted to kind of show you a flow chart that you're going to see. And, it's basically kind of two scenarios. So client contacts you and they want to sell their property. Obviously, the first thing you want to do to protect yourself and make sure that you have an actual agreement in place and protect your commissions is you're going to sign an exclusive seller brokerage agreement. And there'll be key dates in that agreement. The starting date is the commitment date when the agreement begins, and then the marketing preparation begins, and you have your marketing commencement date, like we just alluded to. So let's suppose, though, that your seller says, great, look, want to list my property with you, but I'm not ready for it to hit the market. What does that mean? How would you stay within the rules that FMLS has defined when using the coming soon status? You basically can do internal Harry Norman marketing using InstaList, announcements at your sales meetings, things that we touched on earlier that are clearly permitted in the Clear Cooperation Policy. You could put a coming soon sign in the yard. You can enter it into the MLS as a coming soon status. There's a 21-day max period on that. And then after that period, the change is going to happen automatically within MLS unless you go in and do it before the 21 days. You would remove the coming soon rider, and then you can begin doing all of your public facing marketing, which would include putting stuff on social media, exposing it to the entire marketplace. You can start showing the property, hold open houses and caravan, and etc. So, but just like the registered status, there should not be any showings occurring in a coming soon stage. If you do decide to do that, though, once the first showing occurs, according to FMLS rules and Clear Cooperation, it should be changed to active, and then the property being open to show anybody who would like to take a look at it. And then the second column, Jenny, or row?
Yeah, so if obviously if it's ready to hit the market, it's go, go, go time. And the for sale sign goes in the yard, it's marketed as active, and the public facing marketing can begin straight away. And one thing I'm going to insert here is we had an interesting conversation about, is there a place, why would you want to do coming soon in this market? So we're going to touch on that and some real world, lots of real world situations momentarily. And I saw a couple of comments in the chat about some non-exclusive listings. We're going to hit on all of those things. So stay tuned. That might be coming up in a slide or two.
Great. Okay, so what about those cowboys and cowgirls though out there in the marketplace? Okay, so yeah, I wish I could sit here and say that everybody's doing like they're supposed to. Everybody's adhering to the clear cooperation rules and the rules put out there by the MLSs and so forth and so on. But you know what? The role just isn't full of rainbows and unicorns. So I know that just isn't the case, right? So what do we do? You know, because I know a lot of you are asking your brokers, hey, but I see so-and-so, they're not following the rules. They've had a coming soon out there. You know, it's not in the MLS anywhere. I can't find it. Now all of a sudden it's got an under contract sign and so forth and so on. Well, for starters, going back again to the GREC #1 complaint Paul's team's hearing right now, and even back to the very first slide we shared with Article 1, for those realtors at least who are in the marketplace, at the end of the day, we owe a duty to the public to report these individuals who are either violating the clear cooperation NAR rules, whatever MLS rules are in place, or even license law situations. I mean, that's what we've signed on to do as a realtor, and so we need to take the corrective action and make sure that if we see people egregiously offending any of these things that we've shared so far, we need to let the people know, let those bodies know, and there are mechanisms in place with each of those entities to report any violations. So it's not us being ratting on people or being narcs or anything like that. We owe a duty to the public to, make sure we're protecting everybody in this process. And so the best advice we can give is if you suspect someone is violating a rule, policy, or whatever, document it, take a picture, take a screenshot, grab something that you can see. If it's something that they're doing on social media or something, just document it and then get with your broker and they will advise you as to the next best steps to, turning the information in. I think it's important to note here that, for example, with FMLS, they have a compliance, email that you can send. And if you, are saying, hey, look, I don't think this person is necessarily following your rules, and just wanted to give you a heads up, that is anonymous. So you need to know that that is something that is not going to come back on you, so to speak, if you use the compliance email and report that way. So anything to add there, Jenny, that I may have forgotten?
No, I think all of that is helpful information. And it really comes back to making sure that our clients have their best interest at heart. And we'll touch on that as to some of the specific examples that some of you, are frustrated by and experiencing.
Yep. All right, so now we're going to jump into what we're calling the current market dynamics, or AKA real world challenges or problems. So these are some of the nuances of what's happening in this market right now as a function of limited inventory, still strong buyer demand, people competing for listings, lack of listings in the marketplace because sellers are nervous or skittish. And we're going to just kind of jump through these and really kind of, again, talk about some best practices, maybe some pros and cons. Again, these are all things that a lot of you are in the midst of right now. And they're kind of in an order initially of maybe some buyer, more specific, things with competing in multiple offer situations. And then we'll transfer more to some seller considerations and then kind of finish up with just some general things all of you are seeing now in regards to pressures on commissions and being asked to be a transaction broker sometimes and some of that kind of thing. So we're going to just jump in here and Jenny and I are just going to kind of offer some commentary and, I know we have Tori Hughes on here. So Tori, if you'd like to just add any additional insight, that'd be fantastic as well. But we're just going to start off with escalation clauses versus highest and best. You get asked that a lot. I'm sure you're working with buyers and they, are trying to get the leg up and win the listing. And, there's, I think, part of your job again too, and where you bring value to the transaction, regardless of whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, is explaining the pros and cons of this and not making the decision on behalf of the buyer for them, but explaining here's what they are, this is what they involve, this is how it could go one way to the good, this is how it could go one way to the bad, or multiple ways either way, and explaining it and then letting them make the decision on what they want to do. But I think we all know what escalation clauses are, but I think the big thing we wanted to just point out here is if you choose to use an escalation clause, whether it's $1,000 here every time that the offer comes in, or you've got multiple offers and you got, okay, I'll pay $500 more than the highest offer that you receive, and I'll keep going to a limit. One thing you definitely want to make sure you have included in there, though, is that if there is another offer you're competing against, or multiple offers that you're competing against, that you put language in there that those offers need to be an arm's length transaction. So in other words, it can't be Cousin Eddie making an offer on Uncle Bubba's house to drive the price up because Uncle Bubba got an offer and he sees now that your offer has an escalation clause in there. So that's one way that you can protect your buyer if you choose to use an escalation clause. And there's some great special steps that are in the forums available through app files, both through GAR and also that we've had the help from Campbell and Brandon help us craft along with Ashu. And I would suggest using one of those versus becoming your own attorney and authoring your own special stipulation. And certainly always consult with your broker if you ever have any questions about it. But Jenny, anything to add as far as escalation clauses or highest and best goes?
Yeah, just a couple of things that have come up, and there have been some great conversations in sales meeting or masterminds or ninja groups on these topics. And honestly, you can't get enough of those because it just helps you get better and better. But one of the questions that I thought was particularly pertinent is, what if you have escalation clauses with no caps and you're representing the seller, or, and people just, there's no caps, 2 escalation clauses, how do you determine which one gets it? And that's when you look at what are the other terms going on. Same thing with highest and best. What are the terms of the whole deal? If there is no cap or there is no ceiling, what else is important to the seller in this situation? And you can also take the escalation clauses and go back to those to individuals or entities and say, okay, we've got 2 arm's length, so give us a number. So there's ways to sort of break the tie. And just because you have an escalation clause, it's important to tell your buyers, just because we have one doesn't mean that we're going to, win this negotiation. So let's think about all the other components of how to structure this offer as well.
Yeah, and you touched on earlier, Jenny, the importance of really, having a relationship with that co-op agent. And the last thing you want to do is think that you're benefiting your buyer by using an escalation clause, but alienating yourself because the seller doesn't want to look at an escalation clause. We even heard an example last week at GAR of Seth saying, there are sellers out in the marketplace that find escalation clauses offensive, quite honestly, because it's you're not really trying to do anything. You're just trying to knock out and beat out that next person. And there have been instances where people have gone with the offer that hasn't, been the escalation clause, that just said, this is what I'm willing to pay. And, that's it. I don't want to get caught up in this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So reaching out to that co-op agent and really understanding some of the motivations of that seller could help you be the offer that gets selected. And there is more things in the offer other than just the price of the house, other terms. So
sometimes astute listing agents will put clarity in the MLS comments so that if they don't want escalation clauses, or if they're asking highest and best, that is a good strategy. If you and your seller establish something specific. Be communicative in the comments, because let's be honest, it's going to be difficult to contact 50 people and have 50 different conversations if that's, if that's the interest level. I'm going to jump into the next one because I feel like we've got a lot of good things here. No appraisal contingencies, no contingencies at all. Sure, that's an option that is available, not to every single buyer, obviously, but for the buyers that can go that route, that's something to consider. It's important that you and they understand what that means. That means that they might be having to pay extra in cash if the appraisal comes in at a different number than the offer price. And do they have that bandwidth, from a financing situation if they're getting financing? So those are things that you want to talk about before you release that offer to wherever it's going. Cash offers versus financing. Why don't you tackle that one, Todd?
So yeah, I mean, I know that, these days cash appears to be king, and many of you probably have represented some buyers who need financing because they don't have the cash at their disposal. And so you feel like you're maybe losing out to cash offers. I think, the thing to plug here, honestly, is the relationship and the access that you all have to our fine friends over at Prosperity Home Mortgage and some of the programs that they have available to you, like their Accelerate program, having everything kind of, lined up, keyed up, ready to go. And so that and communicating that to, again, the co-op agent and helping them understand that basically financing with Prosperity is just as good as cash. I mean, the ability to be able to communicate that is, again, it goes back to having that relationship and reaching out to that co-op agent, not doing it by text, not doing it by email, picking up the phone and having a conversation and presenting your offer on behalf of your buyer and walking through all the terms. I think that's a lost art. I won't date myself, but I can remember the very, very first time that I got an offer and I was representing the seller. I went over to their house at 10 o'clock at night and we walked through the contract. Now, that's how I was taught to do it many moons ago. But again, it goes back to having the conversation and not doing everything electronically and through email, and having the conversation. So submitting offers without financing contingencies, even when getting a loan. Yes, that is something you can do. Even if your buyer is getting a loan, there is nothing to say that you have to submit a financing contingency exhibit along with your offer. Now, I mean, in reality, if you've got a savvy listing agent on the other side, they're going to catch that you didn't send the all cash exhibit, or you're missing a financing contingency exhibit. But if you look on the second page of the contract, it says that basically the buyer is going to show up to closing with cash or the equivalent to proceed on the closing of the property. So it is not something that is required if they're getting financing. So you don't have to include it. Just know, like Jenny alluded to earlier, that basically if they can't secure the financing, that whatever earnest money they put up is probably in jeopardy. Love letters, unless you want to touch on something with that, Jenny.
No, I was just going to tackle the thing because I have seen it in the chat, and definitely it is not something that is recommended on for multiple reasons. And what we're seeing a lot more is that the guidance that people are giving in the FMLS or MLS comments is please don't send any love letters. And the reason why is it just puts sellers in a precarious situation. Even if their heartstrings are pulled, maybe it's the best, situation for them. Maybe it's not, but it definitely can put us as practitioners and, more importantly, clients in a bad spot. And we just keep thinking about what is in the best interest of, our specific client. And we want to structure the best offer that we can, but that is not based on things that are protected by fair housing or other things. What we may perceive as something that is endearing may be completely off-putting to the sellers. So it's best to just look at it objectively and structure the best offer for what the seller is really wanting.
Yeah, great point, because
Go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah, we never know. You know, the buyer typically is going to try and pull at the heartstrings, like Jenny said, and talk about, I can see the kids playing in the backyard or walking to school or us walking to church. I mean, those are all three right there. Boom, boom, boom. Fair housing violations, right? And if a seller made that decision and went with that offer based on some of that, and somebody else didn't have that in the letter, that's just opening up a huge can of worms. And you don't want to, if you're representing the seller, you don't want to expose your seller to that liability either, and have them maybe be swayed or convinced to maybe select one offer over the other because of something that might be in a love letter. So the Georgia Real Estate Commission frowns upon it. We're suggesting that it's probably not the greatest of ideas. So no love letters.
Yeah, and as far as overpaying for homes, I won't get back up on the soapbox that I did a few slides ago, but I will say that as it relates to overpaying, it's really a comfort level for your clients. And, you know, overpaying is just a mechanism of, I think there's a difference between, am I overpaying for this house versus am I willing to pay above the list price? And I think that's a differential that is important to discuss with our clients, because I think they're two different things.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next slide here. And I saw this come up in the chat, and so we're going to talk about it for a second. A trend that we're seeing is exercising the option money option in due diligence. And again, we heard last week that, you know, people, the way that works basically is you're paying the seller for the option of having a due diligence period, and the seller gets to keep that money. And so that is a way to strengthen your offer and show how serious your buyer is when you're pledging money like that to have the right for due diligence. Even if it's for a day or 2 days, you're paying for that right. So something to consider, something I think we're going to see more of as we move forward. And there'll be more information forthcoming in the weeks to come about really diving a little deeper into that. What do the mechanics of that look like? What happens to that money? So forth and so on. So we're not going to really go into a deep dive today, but know that that's something that's out there as an option. Another thing that we're seeing is reverting back to before due diligence was in our contract 10, 15 years ago. It was just a right to inspect and request repairs. And the only thing that the buyer could request be repaired was defects. And there was a definition. There still is the definition of what is defined. What is the definition of a defect? But still, people, you know, the reason they removed it many, many years ago is because people would argue of what really is a defect. And then does the buyer really have a right to terminate, unilaterally terminate because the seller refuses to repair some defects? And the seller would say, no, that's not a defect. So it's not a silver bullet or a magic answer, but some listing agents, especially those who have been in the business for a while and then remember those days, sometimes have the ability to convince the seller that going with the right to inspect and request repairs versus due diligence locks that buyer in just a little bit more, and the buyer just can't ask for anything and everything be repaired or terminate without reason.
I'd love to cover, and first of all, a little quick shout out to Mel Emerson for all the good training that she did with you. That's good stuff. I know you're on here, Mel, because I saw you jump on earlier. Thank you for that. Offering more earnest money or non-refundable earnest money. To me, this is a no-brainer, particularly if you are representing the seller. I would strongly recommend that in the guidance that you give on framing offers, that you increase the amount of earnest money from what has tended to be sort of a rule of thumb in years, you know, of late, 1% or 2%. Make that number significantly higher, or you can make it, you know, moderate at first and then have it become non-refundable, you know, a couple of days after due diligence, if a due diligence is part of the structure of the deal. And the concept is people might be more willing to walk away from a transaction if they're only going to lose $10,000, which $10,000 is nothing to sneeze at. But if the alternative is they found a different house that is 100 times better than what the one that they have the offer on, they might be willing to walk away. at $10,000. So adjusting that earnest money or making it non-refundable are good strategies and effective strategies in both cases.
Yep, the next one that we have there, and we're starting to see more of, is the buyer offering to pay the broker commissions. So they're writing a special stipulation that says, in addition to our offer price, whatever it might be, or even if it's over asking price, we as the buyer agree to pay all of the commissions, both the selling broker's commission and the listing broker's commission, which obviously results in a higher net to seller. So don't be surprised if you start seeing some of that, or you might want to entertain that as an option for your buyers that have the ability to do that, in addition to if they're getting financing just coming out of pocket. And then of course it would show up on their side of the closing statement. So something else, again, another term beyond price to sweeten the offer.
Yeah, I'm seeing some good comments in the chat, and they're tough. And I'm just gonna mention a couple, things like, it's sad that buyers can't express themselves. There was a question about, can the sellers say what they enjoyed in the house? And these are the kind of things that honestly make us feel good about what we do, because we're helping people find something that they're going to enjoy living in, hopefully for many years. And it seems sort of counterintuitive as to, why limit that. But the concept is not to stifle it. That expression can still be had, but it's when it's tied to sort of winning or beating out someone else. That's where it gets tricky. We want them to see themselves living there. We want them to talk about that, but it's tying the two together that really is the challenge in the process. And I know it's not always easy, and I respect those feelings. I have them myself. So yes, lots of tricky things there. Making offers sight unseen. And, that's a tricky one too, but because of the nature of how fast you have to be acting these days, it's not unrealistic to expect that. So what are the things that you want to practice in there? If it's your buyer, then obviously you want to put some protections so that when they do see it, if they need to adjust or make a change or whatever, that there's room for that. And if that's not the case, then certainly they can do that. Someone is operating. Todd, is that you? Are you putting the slides on me? That's just mean, man.
Yeah.
So how about covering making offers on multiple properties at the same time?
Yeah, before I move on to that, one of the reasons we have this making offers sight unseen up there, I know that it is happening pretty prevalent in the marketplace right now, but the question came up, and a lot of these things we have as bullets are questions that, your brokers have come to both Jenny and I, or they've discussed amongst themselves. So again, these are why we have them listed. But the question came up with regards to InstaList. And, again, because InstaList is, if it's not listed in the MLS, technically speaking, it shouldn't be shown. It's just you're giving an awareness or a heads up that, it's coming on market. So, but if you were to get a call from another colleague within Harry Norman and you have a match in InstaList and they say, we can't come see the property. We know that the property can't be shown, or otherwise it needs to be changed to active to be in, again, compliance with clear cooperation. However, there's nothing to say that they can't make an offer on the property and not actually go in the property. And again, we have a duty to that seller that we represent to present all offers in a timely manner. So if you do have a match in InstaList, you could write an offer and have it sent over to the listing agent and see what happens. So just wanted to add some clarity to that, which is part of the reason why that bullet is there. Making offers on multiple properties at the same time, certainly, again, something you can do. You want to make sure that you've got a due diligence time period in there for your buyer. So if they do get both offers accepted, they can get out of one pretty easily. But the other thing too is we've got the little asterisk there with the earnest money next to it, is make sure that they have the capacity or the means to, whatever your earnest money is that you're tendering for both offers, that they have the they basically can cover whatever that amount is when the ACH is sent or the check is cashed, that kind of thing. Because typically unless you structure the language in your offer to where the binding or the earnest money isn't deposited until a certain point in time after your binding agreement date, you just want to make sure that they've got the capacity to cover whatever that amount is. All right. Now we're kind of shifting more to when we're representing sellers, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, that certainly want to get as much earnest money as we possibly can when we're on the seller side of the equation. And in addition to that, ask for Harry Norman to be the holder of that money. Traditionally, it's the selling broker that holds the money on behalf of the buyer, but certainly a term, again, that could be negotiated to where you are putting your seller in the best position in case the deal does go south. It's a lot easier for us when we're the holder of the money to handle the disbursement of that, which is why we have that in there.
The seller special stip to find future property. So, there are some sellers who, are nervous about that. There's a lot of sellers that are nervous about that. There's risks on both sides, right? And I think that's important in the pre-conversations to talk about. But there actually is a special stip that allows for the seller to have a certain period of time, and that can be part of the offer, or counter offer situation as well. So that's something to factor in. And before I leave, not that topic, but there's a couple of things about non-refundable earnest money, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I don't want to get off topic here. Some really great comments and feedback, and honestly, we love the dialogue in the chat that allows us all to learn and get better. So I want to make sure not to forget to come back to some of those.
Yep. So then we had the question of what happens if the seller changes their mind. They've gone under contract, they changed their mind for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they can't find the house that they need to go into, and you haven't used a special stip that gives them an opportunity, a window of time to identify that move into property. What happens? Where does that put the buyer? What can you do to protect your buyer? Well, as most of you know, really the only recourse, because the seller doesn't typically put up any kind of monies to, ensure that they're going to fulfill their obligations. The buyer's real only recourse, if they want to, is to try and sue the seller for specific performance. Obviously, too, if the seller changes their mind, and we're on the flip side of that, we get questions sometimes, well, what about the commission, so forth and so on. Typically, pursuing commissions, not that we don't do it, and Eschew's fantastic at it. It can be a lengthy process. And it doesn't happen overnight. Obviously, we send demand letters and things of that nature and try and get those monies. But, it can be very, very challenging, especially if we're not the one representing the seller or not representing the party, whoever was in default. So again, the recourse for the buyer typically is to sue for specific performance, and we can certainly put them in the direction of some attorneys that Eschew knows that are very, very good at representing clients in that capacity.
And sometimes the sellers will sweeten the deal. Obviously, they would return the earnest money in that situation, but they might offer, to cover some of the impact, for maybe cost of inspection or moving expenses or whatever the case may be. It's not a guarantee, and the remedy that Todd references is still there, but that's just information to know. So what happens if there's an offer that comes in during coming soon? Well, we talked about that earlier, and that definitely we need to trigger that. It moves up the situation to making that active. There can be an offer, as we talked about, that is sight unseen. So that doesn't mean that the market, that it was through marketing necessarily that happens. But at that point, if you haven't already had the conversation with your seller about, okay, yes, we can counter this, or do you want to expose it to the full market? What's your preference? If the answer is you don't want to expose it to the full market and you want to take this deal, then we have specific language that, they need to review and agree to, so that they can say, yes, I'm okay with not exposing it to the full market. And for the ease and convenience of this, even though the person hasn't seen it, I want to pursue this. But the recommendation is exposing it to the full market gives them the best option to have the most favorable terms.
And then along those same lines, what happens if there's a request for a showing during a registered or coming soon? Again, it kind of defaults that. If you decide you want to do that and your seller says, yeah, I'm ready to do showings, that's great. But then we need to change the status to active and put the market on, let the market know that we're open for anybody to come and view the property. So, and then the last thing that we have there is assignment. And we are, again, seeing people getting creative and, trying to use the assignment option. Now, the contract says that the agreement cannot be assigned by the buyer unless approval from the seller, written approval from the seller is received, and which may be withheld for any reason or no reason. An assignee shall fulfill all the terms and conditions of this agreement. So in some cases, what we're seeing is creative agents representing buyers who have been in a multiple offer situation, have not been the offer to win, but then they kind of troll the MLS to see who the selling broker was that did secure the listing with their offer, and reaching out to that agent saying, hey, look, my buyer is willing to assume the contract that your client entered into, and they're willing to pay your buyer X amount of money for that assignment. Now, again, that does require written approval from the seller for that assignment to occur, but there is a form in FMLS that covers assignments, and from the assignor to the assignee, and the monies that would be paid and when those monies would be paid. So just know that that is a practice that is now out in the marketplace to try and get buyers into homes that lost out in the offer process. We are going to now transition to all of you and some of the challenges that you guys are dealing with right now in the marketplace. And we've kind of touched on it already, but just the general pitfalls of networking groups outside of Harry Norman. I think the biggest thing there, and Jenny, jump in here, is the exposure from a fair housing standpoint and the liability associated with that. And we've already heard some case law over in California where there was a private group of agents that were kind of cornering a market, so to speak, and not letting other agents in. That could be almost construed somewhat as steering or keeping the public, all of the public, out of a general market area if you're in a private group like that amongst other agents. But what other commentary do you have to add to this?
I think you hit the nail on the head, but something that that I'm hearing in other circles, and many of you may be experiencing this because I know that you're involved in other civic organizations or networking groups, but in a lot of the business meetings that I have related to things that are happening in the city or whatever may be occurring, there's a lot of chatter about real estate. There's a lot of chatter about the dynamics that, because homes are perceived as being scarce and opportunity to homes, this is so much bigger than real estate, but it's real estate where it is proving itself right now. And the reason that we bring this up is not to rain on anybody's parade. It is to, number one, make sure that you are on top of your game and most aware of every circumstance that applies to our business. And secondly, to help put your clients in the best possible position and protection as we can. So I just want all of this. I hope that we all just take a breath because we've covered a lot of ground in a big fat hurry today. But we've done all of this to put our best foot forward for you and for our clients. So I just hope that you take that in that spirit. I'll jump in on the commissions thing next. And it's something that we alluded to before. You're probably getting a lot of challenges. Well, gosh, if I can sell my home in 2 days, why should I pay you X% on this, you know, when it might have taken 3 months or 6 months, a year or whatever to market it before? Well, first, we haven't stopped the marketing. I mean, our marketing machine is still happening in the background. It just so happens that it's not as necessary in order to procure a buyer as before. But to all the points that Todd was talking about earlier, I mean, good grief, we went through what, probably 50 different nuances to how strategies and offers and deals are structured. And for people that are not used to, not experienced with this, frankly, some don't even know what an escalation clause is or understand highest and best. For all of those reasons, those are the things that separate you from everybody else. And when you're talking to a seller and they're like, hey, I don't want to pay. Okay, fine. I get it. You're great. Yes, the value is there. Well, what about I don't want to pay a co-op agent, especially if they're not as good as you? And the answer to that is, hey, if you're getting or think you're going to get above listing price, you want to have the most amount of eyeballs possible and the most and highest caliber of co-op agent on the other side. And this is not the time to be penny wise and pound foolish. So let's look at the bigger picture. You seller are going to gain more than you were anticipating in most situations right now. So let's think about the bigger picture and what we're trying to gain from this, rather than maybe trying to save 0.5% on the commission in order to get, you know, more dollars.
Transaction broker next. Right?
Yes. Would you
All right.
cover that?
So again, you guys are probably getting, you know, asked from time to time about, you know, hey, look, I think I know somebody who would like to buy my house. I know that we're friends and, you know, you've done deals with me in the past, but why don't you just come on in here and let's just go ahead and you be the scribe here and write up a contract for us. And I want you to do it for X amount of dollars and just be a transaction broker. I don't want any, you know, thing other than just, I need your contract and I need you to, you know, fill out the form for me. We know that that's happening. We know that you guys are being asked that question from time to time. And the comments I can offer there are, it's very challenging for any of you to truly serve in a transaction broker capacity. And by that, I mean, when you're a transaction broker in the truest sense of the word and the definition, you don't represent the seller and you do not represent the buyer. The buyer is a customer, the seller is a customer. And there are things that, you know, if you just look at the customer acknowledgements, you basically are there to complete a pre-printed form. But the minute they start asking you for your opinion, your advice on something, you cross the threshold into representation and agency. And because you guys are so accustomed to delivering such a high level of service and expertise and sharing your knowledge and the nuances and the complexities of the transaction in general, I would venture a guess that it's virtually impossible for you to truly serve in a transaction broker capacity without at times dipping your toe into the agency pond. So, and again, going back to what Jenny said before, you do bring value to the transaction. And in a transaction broker situation, you're kind of like the mediary, right? But you still are having to deal with the buyer and still having to deal with the seller. So there is still value to you doing that. So the encouragement there would be that it's, you know, I get why people ask it. They're trying to save a buck, but don't diminish or discount what you are bringing to the transaction and get your fair and full commission in doing so, and have conviction in that.
And excellent points all. And a couple of things that have come up in the chat are, you know, what happens when there is no co-op commission or there's a significantly reduced co-op commission. And, you know, in some cases, the buyers understand the value, and that is why they want someone representing their best interest. And they're smart, and that's wise. In the cases where there are people that don't, you know, feel that value or see that value, our best play is to explain, hey, here's the difference. It's just like someone who says, well, I want to sell my house for sale by owner right now because I feel like You don't have to pay that commission and I can get a willing buyer. Sure, you can. The experience of having a successful and smooth closing is going to be exponentially reduced because the experience that you may have as a seller versus somebody who is active in the business is infinitely different. And the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, comes to mind. You're not going to win every battle. We are not going to win every battle. So choose the battles wisely and go with the people who recognize the value that we provide. And in a lot of cases, people may go down the path and realize, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? I'm in way over my head. And then come back and revisit that with you. So in those situations where you demonstrate, here's the value, and they're just not there yet, give them enough rope and keep the positive relationship so that it's an open door when they come back. Non-exclusive listing agreements. So I think this is our almost last slide or last topic. We'll hit a couple of quick things and then we'll be done. But this is something that came up in the chat and is interesting. I am going to call it what it is, which is a loophole, and that's putting it as nicely as I could possibly say it. And Todd, talk about the clear cooperation and how that differs with exclusive versus non-exclusive, and then we can come back and talk about what do we do.
Yeah, a loophole is, of course, your very diplomatic, elegant way of stating that it's a way to circumvent, some of these things that we've previously shared and what we're seeing as a practice in not only our marketplace, but around the country. Because the clear cooperation, it addresses when you have an exclusive listing agreement with that party in terms of the public marketing and those other things that you have to adhere to as far as clear cooperation goes. When you have a non-exclusive listing agreement with somebody, those same rules don't necessarily apply with regards to public marketing. So what we're seeing agents do is sign non-exclusive agreements with folks, so then they can work around the requirement to put the listing into the MLS, or work around the what clear cooperation says that by putting it in the MLS, they can promote it in social media, in different networking groups, so forth and so on, but they don't have to put it into the MLS because it's a non-exclusive versus an exclusive, and so they're not having to follow clear cooperation. We get it. We know that it's occurring out in the marketplace. Jenny and I reached out to Ashu just to kind of discuss the pitfalls with using a non-exclusive. The most obvious one is from the agent perspective, that you're not protected at all. And by that, I mean, a seller can have 10 non-exclusive agreements with 10 different agents. Basically say, hey, look, first person to go out and find me the buyer wins the golden egg, and so first of all, I would question the loyalty of that seller who is would approach you with that. Now I get in a lot of cases agents are doing it and talking to sellers about, hey, I can just do it, let's just do a non-exclusive, I'll still market your property for you and do everything else. But again too, there's I think some pitfalls to the seller with a non-exclusive as well, and we don't want to. I mean, we'll get into more details of that and what some of those might be. So as you're kind of, we're an exclusive listing. We take exclusive listings. We believe it's in the best interest of the client, tying back into the very, very first thing that we went over. And we believe there's multiple reasons for that. But this is something that we're seeing out in the marketplace that, allows some of these agents to be promoting these properties. And the biggest way that you find out is if you don't see it in MLS, but you see it like in social media or somewhere else, but you're not seeing it come up in the MLS, you have a couple of things that you can do. You can reach out to the MLS and say, hey, I've seen this property on 123 Maple Street with a sign in the yard, but it's not showing up in MLS. Can you look into that for me? And then they're going to reach out to that other agent. And at least that other agent's going to be put on notice that, hey, somebody's watching. And again, at the end of the day, is that really truly fair? Because they can't put the listing in MLS with a non-exclusive listing agreement. MLS requires an exclusive listing agreement. So again, the detriment to the seller is, are they really truly exposing it to the full marketplace and getting the seller as many active buyers' eyes that they can actually get. So again, I don't know anything else you'd like to touch on with that, Jenny, and the non-exclusives?
Yeah, I just think that the best thing that we can be doing and that we will continue to do as a company is help educate people why you would not want a non-exclusive listing agreement, why you as a client, because it puts them at risk. And I doubt that anyone that is pitching this to a client has fully explained both the pros and the cons. And that's our job, is to tell them good, bad, or indifferent. Here's the different scenarios for you, and go from there. So we've covered a lot of ground. I'm sure we have not hit on everything. So hopefully, Tori, you might want to tune in and touch or share with us a couple of things that came up in the chat that we didn't cover, because there were some great questions and dialogue. But while she's tuning in on that, Training Tuesday. So we alluded to this, and basically, if you're attending your weekly sales meetings, you are getting some great content, and part of that is Training Tuesday, but you can also tune in to the H&R YouTube channel and get a lot of incredible content, town halls, great videos, and follow up on Training Tuesday. Anything you want to add there? And then Tori, chime in and let us know what we might have missed.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to circle back to is, I don't want to confuse or, the pitfalls of networking groups outside of H&R. That's really kind of, we're talking about that are specifically there to talk about the exchange of property. Networking groups where you have an opportunity to meet other peers in the industry are fantastic. And again, it goes back to building those relationships with the co-op agents. It's a unique business that we're in, that we rely in most cases on other agents to help us either bring buyers to our listings or to, have listings for us to sell our buyers for. So again, look for those opportunities. Your boards, your local boards are great opportunities to network with other agents in the community. So didn't want to confuse that we were discouraging getting out and getting together with other agents, just not for the purpose of solely communicating buyers and sellers with each other behind closed doors. And then the other thing I'll just close with is, this was a lot of information. I'm personally exhausted from running through it. I know when we did the run through last night, Jenny, it was 2 hours of great conversation and dialogue and prep for this. And again, we started with it. We get it. It's challenging out there. And by no means are we trying to diminish all of these things that you guys are having to juggle and balance and have conversations with buyers and sellers about. We get that it's hard. The only thing I can say too is you have a managing broker team that are absolutely committed to supporting you guys whenever you have unique challenges that you come up against. So lean into them, seek out advice from them. They're there to help you. And make sure that we're doing the very, very best that we can to support you, and by that support your clients. And then I'll finish with this. We've got a not special guest. She's an agent in our own company, but the newly installed president of GAR, I saw Dory Love is on, so I got to give a shout out and a round of applause to Dory. And I think she put some things in the chat. It's pretty cool. Sheila Brower was a president of GAR a couple years ago, Harry Norman agent. Now we got Dory. So to have that representation on a statewide basis just does nothing but elevate us as a company and a brand. And another shout out to our fearless leader, Jenny. She was amazing at the installation. The dress was stunning, but her comments and remarks were even more incredible. You guys would have been very, very proud. It was a great night for Harry Norman in general last week. So that's all I got.
Well, that was very nice. Thank you for that. And yes, definitely a shout out to Dory. So Tori, anything that we might have covered, missed?
One major question was, are we going to make the slides available? And I think we can do that. We had some questions about quiet listings and how that works. If you wanted to cover that.
I think we touched on that a little bit earlier, and maybe we can hit the high points of that really quickly. It says, hey, I don't want to expose it to the broader market. I specifically want it to, not be marketed publicly. I'm okay with, you agent so-and-so marketing it within Harry Norman, because it's not something that can be marketed across companies as a quiet listing, unless someone's auditing my comments and knows otherwise. But if I choose to keep it quiet, yes, I can almost guarantee that a Harry Norman agent can sell this. In that situation, if multiple offers or an offer meets that seller and the terms are acceptable, just remember to use the document that we have prepared that says, I, seller, recognize that, I didn't expose it to the broader market and there's a trade-off for that. I'm totally accepting of that trade-off. And then all is well. There's room for that and all of that, and you can still be compliant.
And then I think that's it, unless I'm missing something. I think we covered everything else in here.
Cool. I think there was one other thing about that I forgot to mention, and I saw a couple of comments in the chat about non-refundable earnest money and option money. And what I failed to mention is that you should always, if you're going to do either of those options, you have language that says that those monies apply toward the purchase price. So it's not like we're just going to write the seller a check and walk away. It's to show the level of seriousness. So yes, I'm willing to pay either more earnest money or non-refundable earnest money, meaning that if, that we're serious and this is the level of seriousness that we have, but that money would still apply toward the purchase price. It's not something that necessarily the seller would pocket. And with that, I think we tackled most of it. You guys look invigorated, smarter. Just, I love it. Thanks for your time today. We appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.